Hello and welcome to this Facebook Live event. I'm doing this as the fourth of five Facebook events, live events on different topics related to business development and also strategic planning, and just some interesting ways to kind of look at topics that would be relevant if you own a small business or if you manage one. So I'm Grace LeConte. I'm a strategic risk expert and I have a background in healthcare management. And today we're talking about strategic area of looking at niche markets. So if you're joining me, I would welcome any questions that you have. I'd love to answer questions live if you have them. And I also have some questions that were sent in to me and that I've been asked in the past by clients. So I hope to participate with you live, and if you're watching this after the fact, then welcome, and I'd love to hear your comments and other questions that you might have. So as we get started here, let me just introduce the topic of niche markets. So a niche is actually, the word niche comes from a Latin word that is nidus, which means nest. So the actual word of the word niche means a nest or a small place where an animal might live. And that's a very interesting and I think a very visual representation of what a market is, that when we create something that's really specific and focused, it's kind of like building a nest for a specific targeted area of your clients or customers. So a niche market is a distinct area of the marketplace, the larger group of people that you might serve. It's where you specifically pick services or products that serve those needs of the market that you're serving. And the reason for doing this, there's several reasons. The first one is because you're solving a very particular need, a very particular problem that that group of people might have. And sometimes those are unspoken needs that they may not even know they have. So you're able to ascertain or realize something that your market of customers or patients would like to solve, even if they don't know what that need is themselves. So that's the first one. The second purpose of creating a niche market is to provide well-defined solutions. So not only do you know what the problem is, but you can also clearly discuss the way that you might solve that problem for them and that meets their needs. So creating a solution doesn't really work if it doesn't solve the problem itself. Like if you try to help an old lady cross the street and she doesn't want to cross the street, then you're solving a problem, but it may not necessarily be helping her to achieve her goals, So solving problems is really important, but we also have to keep in mind the specific needs of the customers themselves and whether they want that problem solved. The third reason we would create a niche market, or to share your business to targeted environments. So that means wherever your customers live, work, play, wherever they have their life experiences and wherever they feel comfortable, that's where you would want to target your services or your products. And finally, it's really hard to have a niche market if you don't feel excited personally about serving that need. If you don't really feel compelled to want to solve that problem, or you don't feel really interested, then it's difficult to keep that going. And there are some very successful business owners that create solutions in areas that they personally may not be very excited about, but because of the nature of how we're wired as humans, it's a lot easier to stay involved and moving forward in the very difficult experience of running a business if you enjoy what you do. And I have read the book Start With Why. I'm not a huge fan of the book itself. I think the concept is great. Simon Sinek is a speaker and philosopher. I think he's really someone that has come upon some interesting ideas, especially with the millennial generation. And I like the idea of starting with a concept of why something's important to you and then using that as the foundation for creating services that meet needs. So that's one really good book that you could use in reference to that. Okay, so I had a hard time preparing for this topic because, as with everything that I do, I like to destroy concepts first. I like to tear them apart and find the root causes, the root problems. And sometimes it's hard to introduce a topic like this because it brings up questions and, I think, underlying fears and problems that many people don't want to talk about. So I'm really sensitive and conscious of the fact that sometimes the issues that are holding back a business owner might be very embarrassing or might feel really uncomfortable. I completely understand that and I commiserate. On the other hand, if we don't discuss these issues, nothing will be solved. The problems won't be resolved. So I'm going to talk about something that I think could be somewhat uncomfortable, maybe not, but I think it really needs to be discussed, and that is the idea of setting limits. So a while ago I read a book called The Millionaires Mind and The Millionaire Next Door, the two different books. Really, really interesting take on the pursuit of consumerism, the drive for us to gather as much as possible, and really a cultural drive, a cultural, basically a need that we seem to have, and that we compare ourselves with what everyone else has, but we never stop wanting to acquire things, and not only objects, but also experiences and a sense of well-being based on what we expect others to have. We want to have exactly what they have or better. And I think that The Millionaire Next Door is a book that helps to explain how a millionaire, someone who has saved up at least $1 million in assets, how that type of person actually does not spend a lot of money. The individuals that save the most and keep the most in a savings account or in stocks and bonds or in investments, they often do not spend the money that they have made. And that's the reason why they have become millionaires. And people who may make $1 million and spend it all have a net worth of 0. So this topic really, it sounds like it doesn't relate, but it really does. The idea of setting limits is very uncomfortable, I think, especially to most Americans. Limiting ourselves in any way feels like it's an affront to us personally. It feels like it would cause us to have a lack of something. We feel like it's going to take away our enjoyment of life. But I would suggest that just like in The Millionaire Next Door, in which true millionaires limit themselves tremendously. They put budgets in place, they limit the things they buy, they decide to put things off, and to live without a lot of things. They choose to have limits. It's very similar to how a successful niche company operates. Instead of trying to serve the needs of everyone, a business owner who decides to niche will have a very specific and very tailored area in which they focus their services or products, and a very clear idea of which people they're going to serve. And they limit everything else. They decide not to serve all the other millions of people who could use their product or service. And the truth is that not everybody will want what you sell. That's a reality that often comes as a very difficult price when you're starting out in sales. Not everybody wants to hear your message. Not everybody wants to invest in what you have, and that's fine. But there are people that will hear your message and respond to it as long as you're clear on what it is that you solve and how they can benefit. So that's the key in sales in general. And marketing is just a way of fanning the flames of that and getting your message out to the most people possible who would respond to the solution that you can provide. So setting limits can feel difficult. It can feel like an imposition on our normal way of living and on our normal decision-making methods. However, I think that there are a lot of benefits to setting limits on how you run your business and how you present solutions to customers. So hear me out. There's some reasons for that I'd like to get into, because I know this can be a very difficult topic. I've had a lot of discussions with clients about the idea of niching, and I think it's often very fear-inducing, because it means that they would have to consider getting rid of things that are comfortable, or not serving a type of client that's not producing a lot of income or profit, as we discussed in the last Facebook Live. But by setting those limits, they can actually benefit quite a lot more with the time that they spend in their business. So there are so many great reasons for doing this. The aspect of purposeful limitation, or the topic of purposeful limitation, mirrors something else I've been writing about, which is minimalist management, or being a minimalist manager. The idea of minimizing or having a minimal approach means that you can take the pressure off. You don't have to feel compelled to do everything all the time, because you're reducing the number of steps. You're reducing the types of people that you would see, or the work that you do, or the types of services you offer. So it takes a lot of pressure off, and it gives you actually more time to focus on what you want to do. It also decreases your reliance on a lot of things. You're not forced to take on more debt, or to have a lot of staff if you can do the same amount of work with less staff. You're not pushed into decisions that you feel uncomfortable with. And you are also less reliant on others in terms of having a safety net. You can have more security in your own business decisions, because you are generating income from a specific area, and that's going to lead you to have more strength as a business owner, instead of being forced into maybe partnerships or other types of business decisions that may not feel very comfortable. Also, minimizing causes you to live more simply. It's a wonderful side effect. When we make decisions with very simple options, either this or that, it reduces the amount of stress that we place on worrying. There's actually a topic that I read about called the paradox of choice. When we're presented with too many options, it actually causes a fight or flight response, where we really can't decide clearly what to do, because we have too many options and too many choices in front of us. So reducing the number of choices actually is very helpful in creating a clear path to reaching the goals that you have in your business. And finally, in addition to living more simply, it also, minimizing things allows you to experience joy. There's a great book by Marie Kondo about minimizing your life and welcoming joy, and basically seeing objects as a pathway to experiencing more out of life, rather than seeing the objects as the purpose for life. She's written a number of books on simplicity and reducing clutter, and I encourage you to read her books if you haven't already. So we can experience more joy and welcome the sensations in our bodies, rather than surrounding ourselves with things. There's a very popular TV series about hoarding, and actually I think there's several TV shows that show the effects of surrounding ourselves with things to the point where we push out relationships and we cause ourselves harm. It's actually quite easy to slip into if we give more power to objects than we do to relationships and to experiencing the world physically. So minimizing objects and things, and minimizing even the decisions in your business, can also lead you to feel more gratitude for what you do have. It's an amazing, like I said, it's kind of like a side effect, or a byproduct of this process of looking at just the simplest things that will cause your business to grow, rather than bringing more options and more things into your company. So the topic of niche markets, I think, is really closely tied to minimalism, or it can be. And it's hard to develop a niche market if you are not willing to give up certain things. If you're not willing to set limits, or to reduce the number of options. If you feel afraid that you'll lose out or miss out, there's something called the fear of missing out. That can actually cause you not to be able to see options that would be easier because of this fear that, you know, if I make the wrong choice, I'll lose money or I'll lose customers or things will fall apart. When in reality, the choice to have too many options is actually doing the same thing. It's causing the business to lose money. So, okay, so let's move on to the outcomes. What are some outcomes from creating this more minimalist niche approach? Well, first of all, you can eliminate a lot of stress. Wouldn't that be nice? You don't have to feel compelled to rush and push harder and accelerate and all of those yang, forceful, you know, more dominant feelings. You can actually sit back and receive and allow the processes that you've set up to result in outcomes rather than pushing and forcing and moving toward a lot of action. You can improve your health. This process can allow you to relax and let your body heal itself, and it can lead to a lot of self-analysis that can help you to be more healthy in general. Also, it can help you increase productivity. So when we only focus on the tasks that lead to outcomes that we want, we end up being more productive. It's just a byproduct. When you spend time on just the tasks that lead directly to your goal, then you don't have to waste time on all the things that are distracting you and keeping you busy, but not necessarily helping you to be more effective as a business owner. And finally, you can enhance the relationships you have with others. You can deepen those relationships, not just with customers or potential customers, but also with community members, with your staff, with others with whom you collaborate, maybe other stakeholders who help you to make your business succeed. So there's so many benefits to just slowing down and seeing the most simple way to make profit by cutting out and limiting all the other options. So limits are an interesting topic. Like I said, I like to basically destroy or blow things up. I know that sounds like a really awful word, destruction, but it's actually part of growth. If you think about it, a seed has to, in some ways, destroy itself to have growth. The shoot on the top and the roots on the bottom, they come out of a seed, but that seed ceases to be a seed once it is growing. In many aspects of life, we have to let go of things and destroy the old in order to see the benefit of the new. So like I said, I'm very much of the mindset of materialism and consumerism being a very destructive force in modern culture. And I also think that relying on debt as a business option can be extremely limiting. It can actually be paralyzing. And yet so many business owners get caught up in a lot of these thinking processes of having to spend a lot of money and get in a lot of debt and make decisions that keep them on the outside looking successful, but internally they may be really struggling with the idea of whether they are succeeding at all. So I've talked to enough business owners, and I know stories of individuals who've made choices that lead them to really feeling paralyzed, and not just in fear emotionally, but also financially and socially. They get into a situation where they can't communicate with other people because no one seems to have the same problem. And I think that's really sad. It's important that we communicate and rely on each other. Interconnectivity is really important in business ownership, but because of the social directive to consume and look successful on the outside, I think that's taken a lot of the opportunity for us to connect with each other. So I think we can enhance relationships if we focus on the niche areas that would make your business most successful, and to connect with customers on basic needs that they have. And sometimes that can be An interesting question, asking your customers specifically what they want and need, rather than assuming it, can open up a huge conversation that might lead you to provide services that you never thought of before. I've done that myself. And many of the services that I offer now are not things I would have thought of a year or 2 years ago, but because of conversations after certain, talking with some clients, I've realized that what they really want is a deep dive discovery into the strategic risk problems that they're facing, and also coaching on a regular basis so that they stay accountable to someone who knows how to ask the right questions. 2 years ago, I wouldn't have thought that those two types of services were important, but because I've had these conversations and I've had to humble myself and say, I'm not quite sure if what I'm offering is what you want. Tell me what it is that you want. I started to tailor my services. So it can be a really eye-opening conversation to have with your customers. All right, so limits are also part of goal setting. In the CLEAR acronym that was developed by Adam Creek, the L stands for limits. So part of developing goals is deciding how to see that future point, and you can only do certain things. You can't do everything in life. You can't be every occupation. You can't have every house that you've ever dreamed of. There are some, obviously we want to dream big, we want to have big goals, but we can't necessarily have everything. So setting goals that are limited is really important, and it's also similar in selecting a niche market. So limits are the opposite of being everything to everyone. I've talked about this a bit in some of my blog posts. Expecting to serve everyone's needs all at the same time is a misunderstanding of how business actually works. I think it's driven usually by a fear that you won't succeed, or a fear of hurting people's feelings, a fear of missing out, as I mentioned. And that fear drives us to want to do everything. If someone asks, hey, do you also do this service, or do you also offer this product? Sure, yeah, anything you say, we'll do that too. I've heard this actually from a lot of service owners. Some of the time I think it comes from just not having a lot of self-confidence that the services you're offering have a lot of value. So when you hear someone asking about something else, you might immediately agree to do that also, because you're afraid that it might reflect on your inability to run the business well. But that's a destructive thought process, because it will distract you from doing the core things that will bring you closer to target customers, ideal customers, and also what will link you to building relationships with them. Or purposeful limitation is another way to call that is voluntary simplicity. It's choosing to only do certain things. Like I said, this can be a very uncomfortable topic. You might be nervous hearing me saying this right now, but it means reducing the options in order to have more freedom. One thing I was thinking about yesterday is the 4-Hour Workweek by Tim Ferriss. Brilliant guy, a little bit wacky. He's done some things that I don't think most humans have done. He's done experiments on himself, and he's tracked his own, thought processes and body, abilities for years. He's a really interesting guy, but he came up with this book many years ago, The 4-Hour Workweek, and he studied how effective he could be in reducing the number of hours into just 4 hours. How could he create processes that would bring the same amount of money, or create a luxury lifestyle with just a few hours of work a week? And he created a system where he was able to do that. Obviously, he doesn't only work 4 hours a week. He does a lot of things. He's probably working 80 hours, but he enjoys what he does. And a lot of it, I think, is the enjoyment makes it not feel like work. But for him, reducing the number of tasks helped him to see just the most important things that would result in achieving that goal. So there's another resource that I recommend. Okay, so some limits obviously are bad. We don't want to have limiting beliefs. So that's the Scrooge Effect, we call it. Having beliefs like, I'm so dumb, I can't do it, I'm a failure, those self-talk thoughts, which actually great exercise to do is to spend 15 minutes and write out what limiting beliefs come to your head. Just write them all out and then look back and see some patterns of where those thoughts are coming from. Maybe they're in different categories. Maybe they're coming from things you heard as a kid or from teachers. That's a really, really helpful self-analysis tool. Can be very insightful. But those limiting beliefs are obviously not good limits. Something else is limiting the quality of ideas. So this would be in a feedback loop. We want high quality ideas. We want potential solutions from not only ourselves, but also our staff, our team, and others who may have input into our company from your other stakeholders. So you don't want to limit that, and you also don't want to limit communication. You want to keep communication lines open without having any hostility or passivity. You know, the two yin and yang. Yang would be forceful and aggressive and hostile, and yin would be too passive and too accepting. You want a balance between those two. But obviously limits can be very helpful. So I'm going to answer some questions before we wrap it up here. The first one is, can you explain what it means to niche a business? I mentioned a bit already, but it basically just means to serve a specific market, to set limits in your business, and to have focused attention on solving those problems for that specific market. Question number 2, what are the benefits of niching and why is it important? So it reduces stress. It can increase your ability to clarify what you want to do. It can increase your productivity, and it can increase the connections with others, developing relationships. Question number 3, is it possible to limit a company's niche too far? What are the examples of when not to niche? So that's a question that has come up. There are some situations when niching might not be a good idea. However, I think the concept behind it is always applicable in every single business. So for example, if you have a broad range of services or products, if you have a lot of things that you offer to a lot of different people, then if you niche, it might potentially affect your business negatively. Or if you feel really uncomfortable with this whole topic, then maybe it wouldn't be a good idea to do too much niching. It might be too hard to just specify one laser focused area. Or if you serve a lot of types of customers and you just don't want to give any of them up, it makes a lot of sense. However, there's still ways to look for the most effective way to reach the customers that will provide the most profit and to provide services that are tailored to their needs. So I think there is always a way to niche in a healthy way. Question 4, how do I decide on a good niche? I'm going to get into more of this in the next episode of the Facebook Live on ideal customers, but I would like to mention 8 areas that are helpful to niche in, and it's based on something that was written a long time ago. Here's a book I'm going to recommend. You don't have to read the whole book. It's actually kind of dry. I read it in one of my classes in strategic planning, but it's called Strategy Pure and Simple 2: How Winning Companies Dominate Their Competitors by Michelle Robert. And it was written in 1998. It's got some great information, a little bit dated, some of the examples. But there are 8 areas that he mentions, and I'll be making another post with more information on this. Really briefly, the 8 areas that I would suggest niching or considering to niche are: first, a product or service driven. If you've developed a product or service that solves a significant problem, then you would want to find specific people who would get the most value from that specific type of solution you've created. So that's one area. The second is a user or market niche. So you'd pick a specific type of person or a specific type of purchasing environment, and that would be the focus of your products or services. Production capacity. So if you have a production method or a warehouse or some sort of production location where you create things and you've done that really efficiently, then that could be a niche. You might be technology driven. You might rely on specific knowledge or abilities that you have to utilize or leverage technology, and that's the area that you could niche in. Maybe it's sales and market driven. You have the ability to gather a lot of types of people and generate sales, maybe for a third party. The next one is distribution methods. So if you have a way of selling things rapidly through a certain type of channel, there's a niche right there. Natural resources. So I know someone that sells fresh cut flowers, and she has a really green thumb. She has an amazing way of creating this natural resource every year, and she can time out her sales to make enough money for the entire year. So that would be a use of natural resources as a niche. And finally, the last one is size, growth, or profit. So if you're more in the finance industry, or you have a way of using money to leverage other money, then that would be a niche area for you too. So these are 8 potential areas where you could niche. And I'll be talking more about the ideal customers and a bit more about how to find them and how to leverage your relationships with them in the next episode. So question number 5, what are some reasons business owners feel scared to limit their market? I think there are 5 reasons, because there are 5 core fears that we all share. This is from an article written by Dr. Carl Albrecht. I've quoted it in my definitions page, and I think it's absolutely amazing because it mirrors the 5 needs that we have. So I call this the needs, fears, and expectations. I'll share a graphic in the post that goes along with this. So the basic fears that we have are, first of all, our basic needs: food, water, shelter, and also pain. So that would be the fear of extinction. If you are afraid of losing significant things that make you able to function in the world, then that would be a pretty significant fear that might be driving you to not want to niche. Second is feeling unsafe and invaded, which we call the mutilation fear. So it sounds really gory, but if you feel completely terrified that your competitors are going to take over your industry and just destroy your market if you niche, there's a reason why you might be afraid to do it. The third one is esteem, a loss of esteem, a loss of people caring about you, which would be the ego death fear. We might be afraid that people make fun of us or think that we're dumb, or, like, what a foolish thing to do. Why are you only doing that one area when you could make so much more money? That's a very valid fear. Number 4 is the fear of not being accepted. So the fear of rejection or separation in Dr. Albrecht's 5 fears. So being separated from our group, being rejected and told that we're not able to participate. If you niche too much and you suddenly can't participate in an important group or club or association, that would be a legitimate fear as well. And finally, non-independent thought. So the fear of a loss of autonomy, that you cannot think for yourself, that you have no control over what happens to your business. Totally legitimate fear. Now, these fears don't have to lead you to make a choice to avoid niching. It just allows you to recognize where the fear is coming from, and then to, based on that, realize where your decisions are generating from, what your root causes of those fears are. So like I said, I don't think there are really any situations where niching is not a good idea. It is possible to go too far and have too specific of an area that nobody wants to purchase from, or that nobody has a need for. But if you're looking at solving problems and you know specifically how to do that for a certain segment, and you can communicate that with them, that's what a perfect niche area would be. And finally, what are some books that you recommend? Okay, so I've mentioned the Strategy, Pure and Simple. Pretty heavy book. It's got a lot of great graphics, though. Here's actually the page I was referring to. Page 110 has the list of the strategic capabilities, areas of excellence, as Mr. Robert says, as he calls them. So this is a great book for reference. You don't have to read it if you're not really into strategic planning or strategic analysis. I just find it really helpful because of the area that I mentioned. And also one that may not interest you, or it may, depending on what you do, is the Consulting Bible. Everything you need to know to create and expand a 7-figure consulting practice by Dr. Alan Weiss. This book came highly recommended. I found it online. I've read it 4 times. Obviously, I am a consultant, so this book is more relevant to me, but there are so many examples in this about niching and finding specific areas of offering services as an expert. There are just some incredible bits of knowledge that I have not found anywhere else. He does quote a lot of people. For example, he quotes Robert Cialdini, Dr. Cialdini, who wrote the book on influence. If you hear anybody else talking about influence, it's likely they're quoting him, or they should be quoting him, because he wrote the end-all be-all on how to influence people. I will be talking about that in the next segment on ideal customers. But if you would like more ideas on how to niche, even if you're not a consultant, I recommend this book because it's been very, very helpful in giving me ideas on how to do that. So we'll wrap this up. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you have any more questions about creating a niche market or defining your niche market, feel free to contact me. You can find my information at lacanticonsulting.com, or visit my Facebook page, or I'm on Twitter and Instagram. There's all sorts of places you can find me. I would love to connect with you and find out more about your questions and needs. And be sure to tune in next week for my 5th installment with this Facebook Live. I'll be talking about ideal customers, and after that I plan to have some more videos. So if you have ideas on other topics you'd like to hear, feel free to let me know. Thanks for tuning in.